Reality of groundsmanship is they're not digital. The softwares which are out there are actually not softwares, but are Excel tables, once developed by some agency. A competitor in that case can be good because it gives you market validation that you're not dreaming up something which is not out there.
TurfCoach is an AI-powered pitch maintenance software that sets quality standards and gives sports organisations a competitive edge.
Pitch has to be within a certain firmness to prevent injuries, get highest performance out of players.
Is there a common denominator between the kind of clubs that are saying yes and the kind of clubs that are saying no?
When you're a startup in the early stage, you need someone who can do anything. So you need people who are able to also develop within the startup.
Today's episode is brought to you by Profile, a PR agency that turns entrepreneurs and CEOs into industry leaders through media coverage, LinkedIn and video.
LinkedIn, media and speaking opportunities are often an afterthought, especially for CEOs. They just don't have the time. That's where Profile step in. They take care of everything. They're an end-to-end service, so you can hand over the profile building to them and worry about driving the growth of your business.
So if you've got a story to tell and you want to build a profile as an entrepreneur or industry leader, you can find out more by going to www.welcometoprofile.com. Before we get into it, into the podcast, I just want to completely understand everything that TurfCoach is covering. So obviously you're talking about from the actual grass itself. Yeah. And then, you mentioned sort of player stats, coach stats. So is that, for example, if you're watching a game of football, or I don't know if it actually exists in a real life game of football, but at least when you're playing FIFA or something, it'll show like a heat map of where players are moving, what's going on. Is that the kind of thing that TurfCoach is also doing, or does that exist as something? Or
No, because we don't have GPS data itself.
Okay.
Yet from the players. Yeah.
Okay.
What we do get though is if you give us the movement data of the players, we can overlay that and compare it to the grass data which we have. So what we do model is each corner of the pitch, each area. Yeah. How much sunlight is this area getting? Yeah.
Okay.
How is this corner treated differently? So that's what we collect.
Oh, that's it. Yes, because you watch a game of football and the sun's out. You see half of the pitch is in the sunlight and half of it isn't.
And then you wonder how many groundsmen actually take care of the area with sunlight differently than the one with shade.
Yeah.
Very few.
And so what you're saying is that at half time, when they all come out with their little pitchforks and they're just so you're saying that if they're looking at it in real time, they could think, okay, this corner needs more of this and that corner needs more of that.
And then they can work predictively.
Yes.
Right? So then you can actually say, you know what, I know that tomorrow it's going to rain X, Y, Z amount of millimeters. Yeah. Hence, I want to improve the drainage. Therefore, I'm going to make sure to aerate before so that we have improved drainage. Yeah. Or I'm not going to water it for 10 minutes before the game, but only for a minute. Yeah. So basically, you're going to base your decisions off data, which is the one thing, the maintenance decisions. But then that has, of course, a huge impact on the entire game, which that's where it really becomes interesting, because connecting it to performances, to injuries, and essentially protecting players, and creating a uniform, defined standard of gameplay. That's the direction we want to go to, at least. Why did I start this company? Let me start maybe there. Well, I was working in a precision agriculture company which was focused on avocados. They got bought up. They had made a software for avocados. Now, pretty straightforward, because in avocados we only eat one type of avocado. So I took the deck of that company when they were bought up, changed the logo with a logo which I got on Figma for $10, and sent out a fake presentation as if I have a product to 4 football clubs in Germany on a Thursday night to info at. Yeah. I didn't know anything.
Nice.
Okay?
Yeah,
Straight out into the darkness.
But why?
Because I thought to myself, look, any plant is a big market in general.
Yeah.
I mean, the beauty of turf is there's literally 3 turf species, and that's all of the ones which we're using across the world to play sports on. Whether it's golf, cricket, rugby, football, you name it. So pretty straightforward, okay? If you can make a digital twin, if you know how to grow this one plant, you have a relatively big market. And the beauty of sports is the guys which are running on on that turf are worth several millions. So I'm not looking at margins, but I'm actually talking about high value assets on a field where, if you know the conditions, it's pretty well. So I figured, let's see what's out there. And I just wrote to 4 clubs, and within 24 hours, all 4 clubs responded.
What?
And that was my cue. And that was when I said, okay, whoa, wait a second. And that's when I went to RB Leipzig, which at that point had like the third most valuable team in the Bundesliga, based in Berlin. And then from Berlin, I went to Wolfsburg and Frankfurt and Union Berlin. And I realized, okay, the reality of groundsmanship is they're not digital, they're analog. And the softwares which are out there, which Scott knows also, for example, and what general groundsmen would talk about, are actually not softwares, but are Excel tables once developed by some agency. So there was no user testing here. There was no adapting. There was no listening to your client. So that was my idea to say, okay, there's a general business case here. And I think there's a niche and let's go for it, you know?
So just to kind of dive in a bit deeper in that, because it's a great story, right?
Sure, yeah.
You've got the deck, but what about all of the, for Reading Football Club, where you've installed the product, you deliver so much data analytics. Did you have all of that also ready as an IP to
Zero.
kind of, oh, right.
Nothing. I mean, we're going back 3 years. I had nothing. I didn't even have a software. I literally had nothing.
Okay.
I had an idea.
And the confidence that you could build the software.
Well, I'm the confidence to say that based on that idea, if I have LOIs from some clubs, which then I got, I'll be able to find some grants and some funding. So I went off, started with the first public grant, talked with a former student, a friend who I met at university, asked him if he wanted to join, and we started just kind of kicking it off with the first public money. And luckily, we're not talking about a lot of money. You get 2.5K per person, before tax. And so and then we moved to Leipzig, to the groundsman there. He was amongst the top in Germany, and started using his tools and started building wireframes and showing it to the groundsman and being like, hey, is this useful for you?
So when you pitched it to those first 4 clubs in Germany, what were you saying in that pitch? What product were you offering them?
Oh,
even though it didn't exist.
Yeah, no, it was still distinct. My idea was to tell them, look, a software for pitch maintenance. That was the first start, because they weren't using any software. And I'll make sure the software is easy to use, the software makes sense. And software will help you in your daily operations to take data-driven decisions, but also record your data, etc.
But at that time, did you have a sort of an idea into the future that I'm going to be able to turn this into something that the club can look at when they're considering player injuries and tactical and...
No, not yet. Actually, that was something which, to be honest, came later through research. We did sign out a position for, and that was our first hire for a human movement scientist, which is Kevin, who was our first hire. But that was only because I realized, okay, the soil, turf itself must have an impact on performance and on injuries, but I have no idea how. I mean, I'm not a medic.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you found some studies, but they were old. So it was all, but luckily what appeared pretty quickly on my horizon was competitor analysis. Oh, there's a competitor which is saying that the pitch has an impact on injuries and that they're focusing on reducing injury risk. Right. So a competitor in that case can be good because it gives you market validation that you're not dreaming up something which is not out there.
Yeah, okay, cool. And a lot of the people who listen to our podcasts are founders or aspiring founders, people who want to build a business or maybe even building a business. You had the interest from the clubs, your first customers. You had then some money, let's call it, to deploy the public grants to develop the product. How did you decide to then develop the product? Did you decide to partner with an outsourced company, or did you decide to internally hire your expert team?
In-house, because it's a software. So when you build a SaaS product and you outsource, I guess it only makes sense if you really if you keep your core IP, which in our case is the data, in-house. Yeah. So in one way or another, you need to keep your core IP in-house. For us, the core IP was that we are the one who are building the software and that we can change the software and adapt the software based on user feedback.
Yeah. Right. So you didn't have the option to outsource?
No, not that. And that is costly. Yeah. Right. So as soon as you do software development, let's say in-house in London or Berlin or Paris or Madrid, it's going to cost you a bit more than when you do it maybe with an outsourced company.
Yeah.
But it will also allow you to not be dependent on that outsourced company in the near future when you need bugs to be fixed, languages to be adapted, etc.
Yeah. And how did you find Kevin, employee number 1?
Oh, I signed out that position and literally, I mean, let's be honest, he was, there were 2 applicants, overall. Yeah. The one didn't even live in Berlin, so there was definitely no choice. Yeah.
No offense, Kevin.
Yeah.
The man for the job.
But I mean, we were also really cautious because we didn't really have a lot of money, public money
Right.
here only. And so, yeah, we had a first interview, a second interview, and then straight after the second interview, I told him, hey, let's meet up for lunch right now. And so we went for lunch. And yeah, best hire, to be honest, because when you're a startup in the early stage, you need someone who can do anything, yeah, and just go and dig into it. So before Kevin knew, he was into agronomy, and the next thing I know now, he's our data scientist, and he's even coding and working together with the backend team. So you need people who are able to also develop within a startup and be able to actually embrace that.
Yeah, absolutely. And how big is your team now?
Now we are 9 fixed employees and we have another 5 freelancers.
Okay. And just kind of in a nutshell, how has that experience been for you? Is this the first time you've built a team?
Proper company, which is not only solo based, yes.
And has it met with your expectations of how it would be?
Woof. I mean, I recently saw this interview. I think it was, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the founder of one of the big tech companies who was saying, if someone would have told me it's such a pain before founding, probably wouldn't have done it. And there is a big aspect to it. So yeah, there's a lot of suffering, which I didn't envision, obviously. But I guess it's part of being a hopeless optimist to become a founder.
Yeah. And for the people who look, because as you well know yourself, you were there when you have employee number one and you've got what's ahead of you to come. It feels very optimistic and very kind of like it's inevitable, it's happening. And then you get to the end of it 3 years later and there's been suffering. What are some of the things that you suffered?
First thing, and I think that's the main reason why startups fail, is obviously you have issues at the beginning with founders. Yeah, so that was very difficult. Yeah, founders conflicts and how you kind of resolve these. And there, it's important to have shareholders agreements and like documents which you can base yourself off. So that was definitely a difficult aspect, but luckily got resolved very fine. Yeah. The other aspects which I would highlight are definitely fundraising in times of post-COVID, which was dry. Yeah. And the third thing was just not listening enough to the client. And for example, at the beginning, we were still thinking of working on different hardware aspects, and we tested a lot of hardware technology. But sometimes the simplest things, which in our case now, for example, are the QR codes which are on the machines, make the huge difference for the client. So what is the real pain point and what makes the client pay day one? And identifying that and not thinking in your chambers, in your office, oh, I have this great idea. No, the great idea is always kind of defined from the outside. So just go and talk straight to your clients and find out what they would be willing to pay for and what that easy thing can be. And it can be something which is not difficult at all, but just because you're the first to provide it. I mean, we're the first to provide a simple way of how to record their activities. Then we were the first to provide them a calendar which made it simple for them to plan ahead.
Can you talk to us and our audience about what it is when a groundsman or whichever football club it is decides to go with TurfCoach? What happens next? What are you doing? What are you delivering to their grounds?
Yeah. So if he decides to go for TurfCoach, it's often already after he had a 1-month trial, because we're talking about an industry which is on average, in general, very analog. Yeah, so there's no software tool used on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, so what we need to do is we need to convince them, first of all, of our software, which often requires us to do an install for them. So what does an install look like? It means we go to a club, like here Reading. We assess all their machines, we assess all their inventory, we look at all their pitches, we analyze how the shade falls onto each pitch. We take certain amount of measurements of each pitch to kind of have a foundation for our data modeling. And then we know, and then we basically digitized his entire infrastructure. And then we go ahead and we have a tiny workshop, if you might, where we show everyone how to use the software and what's the benefits for the head groundsman, but also for the groundsman on who's actually doing maybe not managerial tasks, but actually just work.
Right.
If you watch that Amazon series, All or Nothing, about Man City, and you look in behind the closed doors of what's going on at a football club, it's not like it was in the 90s where it's 20 lads in a room having a beer, having a laugh, and then going and kicking a ball around. It's now more like a science experiment. And their recovery, strength and conditioning and everything. They are so micromanaged, their sleep, what they eat at home. And so can you tell me how, if at all, this is beneficial to a football club's when it comes to winning titles as opposed to just preventing injury?
Yeah. So this is actually the main reason why I'm still very confident and very happy and remain one of the, let's say, convinced, yeah, to put it like that, of the fact that groundsmanship is completely underrated. Yeah, it's because so there's studies which show and estimate that the surface conditions can influence up to 20% of the performance. And if you think about it in very practical terms, it's a difference of cutting the grass at 29 millimeters or cutting it at 21 millimeters. Both is according to the rules fine, but it makes a huge difference in the ball roll speed. Yeah? Then whether the pitch is soft or hard, just imagine the difference between running at the beach and running on concrete. And essentially you're having players which are worth something like Formula One cars, but nobody knows the racetrack and nobody's adapting the wheels, meaning players are not even wearing custom boots yet for pitch conditions. So if you put all these aspects together, there's quite a lot which you can influence, whether it is how you want the ball bounce to be or the ball roll speed to be, how quick you want the game to be. And these are factors which are currently not considered at all. So, I mean, we talk about all or nothing, Man City. Yeah, Man City does not model the pitch in real time. I know Man City takes field measurements, yeah, but I know that an actual model of the pitch conditions in real time is not necessarily there, but could be of interest. And I know that Pep Guardiola, when he was at Barcelona, definitely had the grounds team come in at halftime to look and give a short outlook at how the pitch will perform in the second half of the game. That's just as a little idea there. And
so when you say, sorry to interrupt, but when you say in real time, so are we saying that there could potentially be an extra member of the coaching staff sat on the bench with an iPad looking at the analytics for the turf?
I would say at least before let's say the team goes out, the players should know which boots to wear. They should have a recommendation. The coach should potentially have had a conversation with the grounds team to understand A, what will the weather be like, because the weather a groundsman can change, but B, how do we adapt our pitch based on the weather forecast and the team we're playing against and the tactic you want to employ.
So do the types of football boots, for example, exist to take into account the subtlety of difference? So my understanding, back when I was playing Sunday League football as a teenager, is it's pouring with rain, I better get my long studs on, or it's dry as a bone out there, let me get my moldies on. So if I can look at this data now, does the technology exist in terms of football boots to be able to give me that advantage? Or is it just, I kind of wish my studs were half a millimeter longer?
I would say depends. There's two sides to that. The one side is, yes, you can definitely change studs. You can change the stud configuration in a stud shape. That is possible. Change the shoe shape as a whole is maybe difficult, but if you would, what's possible already is to have a 3D scan of your foot and then know on which shoe you have a certain pressure distribution which is potentially optimal for you.
But do you see my point? Because if there are, let's just say there are only two types of studs available.
Yeah.
And you can more or less guess because the ground is wet or the ground is dry.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm trying to work out is that even though this data is incredibly helpful, are you able to always action a response to it?
I would say first of all, there's not only two studs. I mean, there's a range of shoes, even from, let's say, Adidas itself, right? And then there will be the performance boot, there will be sprint boot and so on. So within that category already, you would want to know which one is the optimal for me. And then within that one boot, there might be the firm ground boot, the soft ground boot, the mixed boot, yeah, and then there will be maybe one for artificial grounds. So forget the artificial, but you still have three to choose from. And then 3 times, let's say, another 8 new boots coming out. That's one way of seeing it. But the other way is, I mean, these players are worth a lot of money. Shouldn't they have a custom boot? I mean, we're having custom Formula One wheels for every racetrack. Shouldn't a footballer have a custom boot for a hybrid pitch, for a natural salt pitch, for a different grass species which we're potentially playing on?
And do you think with the technology that goes into the keeping of the pitch, should there be more of a uniformity? So instead of, saying it could be 21 millimeters or 29 millimeters, should it not be the case that it's all just 25 and everyone does their best to try and maintain that?
Ooh, I would say if there's obviously tendencies where they are standardizing the quality, yeah, and saying we're supposed to have a uniform pitch, uniform visuals of the pitch. But I would say a lot of clubs and a lot of groundsmen actually consider this as part of their home turf advantage.
Right, I see.
Yeah, so to know how to adapt the pitch. There's other clubs which are very transparent about their data because they already are potentially at a very high level, but it's certainly part of the magic.
Yeah, but I suppose to make sure you get that home pitch advantage to the maximum possible amount, you want to have your training pitches equal to your playing pitch.
That's definitely something which,
Yeah.
for example, if you know you're going to play on an away pitch, you want to maybe imitate that away pitch already on your training grounds,
Right.
if possible.
Right. I'd like to talk to you about the business side of things, if I can, for a second, because it seems to me like you've built a product here which has been very warmly received by the clubs you've spoken with. How many clubs are you working with now, out of interest?
Right now, around 30 clubs.
Okay. And, I like to ask this as a challenging question, but why haven't you sold it to all of the clubs yet?
Oof. Essentially because we're on the market since March, April, and with a product which I would say is ready to be just sold. And there's resilience, and you need to have a certain, let's say, time to convince. Plus, there's an issue definitely which is with native languages. So if I want to sell to a club in Croatia, I need to have someone speaking Croatian to the groundsman, because the likelihood of the groundsman being perfectly fluent in English and willing to use a tool which is not in his native language is rather.
And does it make a difference that different leagues have different uniformity requirements, or do they use different metrics, or is that a barrier to anything, or is it all more or less the same thing?
I would say the metrics are relatively similar because the FIFA came out with some metrics and now Premier League adapted them to a certain way, Bundesliga adapted them, or Serie A or La Liga. But what one barrier definitely has been and still is that some clubs have literally just outsourced the maintenance of the turf, and they consider it the cost factor. Yeah, so they don't necessarily see the advantage as to say, oh, why should I invest more? Let's just keep it at a minimum. Yeah. Which can also be what is related partially to the fact that there's not a lot of qualified ground staff outside of England always, and it's not always a full qualification and academic title which you can get. So that might be one issue which has been a bit of a barrier.
Could you just set out a few of the different countries and leagues that you're working in, and then, I'll ask you a question after.
Yeah, sure. We work with the Serie A, for example. We work in La Liga, we work in the Premier League, the Bundesliga, Polish Ekstraklasse. Yeah, and maybe just, for example, markets which are very strong with external companies are, for example, Italy and Spain.
Okay. And is there a common denominator, or maybe a few common denominators, between the kind of clubs that are saying yes and the kind of clubs that are saying no?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would say the kind of club which says yes, there is a culture within that club that the grounds are important for the results, for protecting your players, and for the overall growth of also your youth. Because I think the stat is 72% of the academy players in Premier League academies have a non-contact injury. Non-contact injuries are pretty directly correlated to the pitch.
Yeah.
And if you want to develop your youth, if you want to protect your assets while they're growing, that's one of the core things. So clubs which tend to have a strong academy tend to really look and watch out for their pitches.
Have you been approached by any other types of sport organisation? I'm thinking, of course, of things like golf, yes. To which your product would seem to apply very well and suitably. Yeah. And what's your opinion on that market and your strategy behind it?
We have been approached by several other sports. We have pilots running with universities and schools, as well as in cricket and rugby. Why are we not doing golf yet, even though it's a huge market? It is because this pitch here, if you look at that field, we can model it pretty well because I know the soil conditions are similar, the grass species is similar, and the area we can kind of model it pretty well with shadefall, etc. If we look at a golf course, bunkers, different kind of soil conditions, different drainages, huge, vast areas. And at the end of the day,
are you saying course to course or within the same course?
Even within the same course. Right. And if you then look at it, in golf, it's all about the ball roll, whereas in rugby, as well as in rugby and American football, for example, there's again the player-surface interaction, which has the injury aspect, which, in all honesty, a player is quite a bit more worth than a golf ball.
Yeah, sure.
Or the cricket ball bounce.
Yeah, it's just interesting, really. I suppose the kind of connecting factor is that golf clubs often take their grounds very seriously. And so talking of your customers in the football space who take their grounds very seriously, and that's kind of earmarked them as a potential customer, that's golf. You know, that's all great golf courses. Do you think it's something that TurfCoach will take on one day in the future?
100%.
You're going to be the monopoly of turf management, aren't you? You go to play sport, it's being managed by TurfCoach.
Well, I mean, I would love to, let's say, be able to set and define a standard which is based on real-time modeling of pitch conditions or turf grass conditions. And we're certainly going to go into the space of golf for sure. But for the time being, our focus is really rather to push the agenda further on football and then look at other sports such as American football, rugby, as well as, let's say, the market which is a bit more multi-sport, such as universities or maybe city councils managing sport grounds.
We have Scott, who's about to join us. We'll pull up a chair from him and invite him in.
True.
So Christian's been talking to us about the business that he's built and the product that he's provided to Reading Football Club. And yeah, we're glad to have you here. What do you think? What do you think about it all?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, regards to the product, really good potential. We've been working sort of alongside Christian and sort of tweaking little bits of it, and that like to bespoke it more for us. But yeah, it's really good to have the data input that we're able to have out of it.
Out of interest, when did you guys first meet?
Soltex.
Soltex, last year.
Yeah, Soltex.
What's Soltex?
It's so basically, as a grounds management association, it's an event where it's at the NEC in Birmingham, where everyone from within this industry and other sports and everything sort of get together. You've got products, machinery, all sorts, everything from sports equipment, goals, everything there, all the big companies.
And Christian came and grabbed you.
Yes, yeah, he sort of, we met on an aisle, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly, just smooth talk. Hey, what's up?
I
hope that you would stop.
And yeah, he's from there, we sort of had a few discussions, exchanged some details, and yeah, sort of here we are.
Is it commonplace for groundsmen to sort of look into this area of, you know, because even though I'm a football fan, as a layperson, I think, well, your business is just grass and that's got nothing to do with data.
Yeah, so obviously there's always that side of things. When you're sort of outside the industry looking in, you've got this outlook that it's just grass and sort of my lawn looks green. But obviously, what you are effectively doing is you're trying to manage something that's pretty much being used intensely every single day, and it's got to meet a certain requirement. And also player safety. There's a lot of science that goes into it, sports science as well. So this is when we talk about data collecting. Pitch has to be within a certain firmness in order to prevent injuries, for better play, to get highest performance out of players. It's also, you've got to consider other factors. Direct play, you've got obviously aeration and things like that you've got to do to make sure that games go ahead, and obviously you're constantly keeping the infiltration of the pitch and the drainage spec up. Yeah, so loads goes into it. I bet
you're already confused from the terminologies here.
I mean, actually on the terminologies, the language seems like a tricky thing to kind of talk about, because you get your experience right in making a perfect pitch, and you can see from your experience of it what's. Have you ever had an experience where players have come off the pitch and told you that the pitch was different to how it actually was?
Yeah, so obviously we can only take so much measurements, but to get reality, you sometimes do want to see it in action. Obviously you can measure traction, you can measure firmness, height of cut, sort of, there's all these parameters you can do, but effectively you don't actually fully know until you see it out there. But there's a lot of correlation now between ground staff departments and sports science as well, to ensure sort of to keep players' injuries at a minimal risk, and obviously to get the highest performance out of players. So,
can you give me an example of how using TurfCoach has given you data which you've then in turn made adjustments to?
Well, it allows us just to log regularly, sort of cleg in and moisture contents and other factors at play. So we're able to then use that, and across the team they can all obviously visually see that on an app and they can see it. And from there we can make decisions like, if it's too firm, obviously there's practices that we'd have to do, because obviously if the pitch is too hard, then you kind of are putting players at risk. Right. So you've then got to consider, okay, well, there's certain practices we can put in place to reduce that firmness and sort of bring it back to the right parameters. Sometimes the pitch could be too soft. And obviously, yeah, if traction's not very good, then your pitch is cutting up. Obviously, it's not taking a foot very well, and that can obviously be very dangerous for players. You might see on TV sometimes when you sort of see clumps of turf coming out, or if you're ever watching a football match, and yeah, that's the kind of thing you want to avoid, because obviously then you are at high risk of injury.
Yeah. And considering the high risk of injury, is it reassuring to have the data to back up the decisions you're making? Definitely.
Without the data, because there's even moisture outputs. Like in the summer, you're watering blind, for instance. So you're effectively, if you're on mains water, you're costing a lot of money, and the pitch, if you're taking a moisture reading, the pitch might not necessarily need water. Also, with moisture, you've got to then consider disease. If you're putting too much water, if your outputs are too high, then you're obviously going to attract disease, which then causes you to use products, which again affects budgets. And vice versa the other way. If you're droughting the pitch and not putting enough on, you'll find that it's creating stress for the plant, and the plant's it's like us really. Like, it goes through different types of stresses, like strains and everything else. And with stresses, it weakens the immune system and things like that. So we've got ways of obviously trying to strengthen the sort of soil biology side, and obviously the plant tissue itself and cells, to try and obviously combat, make sure we don't get disease, try and prevent disease best we can.
Yeah.
So the economics of it, would you say that TurfCoach allows you to promote the longevity of your turf?
Yeah, because it allows us to communicate amongst the team and obviously make informed decisions via data and everything else, and also it helps with machinery and everything else, because every time you use a machine you're able to scan it, so you know how many hours that machine's doing. You can keep on top of all your servicing. So obviously, yeah, that's a massive part in if you're using this. Say for instance you've got a fleet of mowers, and you can actually see how many hours that machine's actually doing, so then you can rotate the machines so they're obviously a bit more evenly worn.
Right, makes sense.
And also you can actually log in and spy on them a little bit, see what they're actually doing. see what they've done now.
Don't want that on the record.
It allows, and obviously what's really good about it is the training ground and stadium then you can sort of see what they're doing, what height they're cutting at, without having to ring up and be like, what height? So there's obviously those benefits there.
Is there such thing as a perfect pitch to you? Do you ever get off and just think that pitch today is perfect?
I mean there's some fantastic pitches out there, and a lot of hard work goes out there. I think everyone's their own critic. I think you'll find that no one will ever think their pitch is perfect, but I think if you look at a lot of the pitches that we're seeing on TV and that,
I reckon most of the groundsmen are perfectionists about turf. Yeah, and if you turn around and you look at this pitch here, you would say it's immaculate. And Scott will be able to tell you 50 things which he would be like, but look at that, yeah.
Yes.
But, but to be honest, I think already the level is very high. And it's just the value which you can take out of it by connecting it to other departments, which really increases once again the importance of groundskeeping, which maybe wasn't that case before. I mean, you can go 20 years back and look at some of the brown muddy pitches which are out there. Now you won't find that anymore. But you will also see that maybe pitches get changed or adapted based on who you're playing against.
Yeah, I mean, what's a massive factor for us is we've never had this until we moved to this training ground, was obviously the use of hybrid, which is sort of where you got sort of artificial fibres stitched in. So you got 5% of this pitch will have artificial fibres stitched in, which reinforces the root structure, entwines with the fibres, and basically just allows you to, for instance, they trained on it yesterday, and we haven't done anything to it other than brush it this morning with a tractor brush just to take the dew off and any mycene off, which is trying to prevent disease, dry the leaf out, which is again stages of practices you've got to take into consideration in these high disease pressures. But yeah, it's doesn't really, like, you don't get, it plays completely different to a soil pitch. So over there we have soil pitches. You'll see they'll divot more, cut up more. Here it would just scratch it. The divots are a lot smaller. They're just more just scars really. And yeah, I mean it can take a lot more use than a normal soil.
So looking
also,
at
you make other maintenance, right?
So this pitch behind us, obviously you can look at it and assess it, see how its condition is after the players played on it yesterday. Yeah. But then if you want to check the data about it, I mean, I don't know if this pitch in particular has data registered on it. How do you actually go about that?
So before a use, you would, I mean, the stadiums, they're obviously very regular up there. Obviously, there's a lot of pitches here to collect a lot of data, so obviously it does take a bit of time. But obviously, we try and do it as frequently as possible. So what you find is someone will go out with a clegg and obviously check the firmness. Now, obviously, you kind of want to be within the parameters of sort of 85 to 95. And that would obviously, that would allow the correct firmness. Obviously, if it starts going above that and it's in the hundreds or maybe it's lower, if it's in the hundreds, you've got to then consider maybe you soften it up a little bit.
And is that device there responsible for the firmness? Is that a firmness machine? Yes. Chris, can I?
Yeah, I can go grab it, sure. I mean, this is kind of firmness 2.0 because I think have you heard of the Deltec? It's similar, it's a field testing device, yeah. But this is just, it measures force reduction, energy restitution, vertical deformation, and it's just one of...
You said I have so many words just and I didn't know what they
essentially,
meant.
it gives Scott a few more parameters, yeah, than just the firmness. And at the end of the day, this is one of many devices which are employed to measure pitch condition.
Right. So what's it actually do? I mean, in layman's talk, what process is it enacting on the ground?
And just press on, yeah, and you'll see how this weight will fall down. Yeah.
Okay.
And
they couldn't see on camera, but something just fell down.
Yeah. So basically, based on how the weight falls, it will measure A, how much it jumps back up. It will measure B, how hard firm the surface was. Also, how straight the jump back up was, so the vertical deformation. And all these values will be displayed. And this is basically just a slightly more advanced version of the clegg hammer, which you also know, right?
I mean, you're able to keep more of a consistency with this as well, because obviously we're more manually doing it. We've got a red line and you sort of got to line it up and then drop it, so you can't guarantee you could be a millimetre or so out. So at least that one there, obviously every time it's exactly the same how it drops.
Yeah. And how many spots of the pitch would you test?
We test up to sort of 32.
Wow.
Yeah, you do proper pro level high. I mean, FIFA says 18 points before a match, ideally. Yeah. German Bundesliga says 6. Yeah. So
I think you can sort of, as long as you're testing enough. Like sometimes you go OTT and do 30. Sometimes you wind it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Depends on time. I mean, before a game, if you've got a bit of time, you'd want to be quite thorough.
Yeah.
Obviously, the more points, the better the accuracy of data, really.
And also, I mean, I might be wrong here, but I think when you're able to collect the data in a reliable way and actually make use of the data, it makes a whole activity far more worthwhile. Because if you're out there on your own, let's say testing, it's more tempting, I suppose, to go with gut feel. Whereas if you know that the 32 testing places that you test, you get to have the data from, it's useful for you and your team, then suddenly it becomes a worthwhile task, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it helps the team understand more as well. So, like, you might say, oh yeah, we've got to do this today, and they might be like, oh, that's quite a long operation. But if the data's there to explain why you're doing it, it makes life a lot easier rather than just a whim. Oh yeah, we think we should do this. So the data's there, so obviously it helps encourage the rest of the team, motivate them to understand why they're doing it.
Anything else to add before we lose Scott?
maybe just to add that here you have an example of a very data-driven, advanced groundsman who is actually welcoming the data. And I would say there's always this kind of, in every industry that's normal when you go through a process of digitalization, that people are maybe a bit resilient in the first moment, but when you learn how to use the data, it ends up being to your advantage, I hope, at least.
No, definitely it has been. Definitely is.
Cool.
Wicked.
All right, thanks
Thanks, Scott.
Cheers.
Thanks, Scott.
Cheers.
Thanks. How long has it been since you actually launched?
3 years that I have the company, and that I launched only since like March properly.
And is cash now less of a concern?
Yeah.
Cool.
When they're inputting the data, are you compounding trends? You're giving them, because I'm assuming Because you previously criticised it's not just an Excel document, there is something computationally behind it that's giving them some feedback.
Yeah, and suggestions.
Good, okay,
yeah,
nice.
And we start soft, because if you start too strong, soft as in, hey, I think your machine needs to get maintenance. You're running low on stock. Maybe you want to consider that tomorrow it's raining and thus you don't want to spray tonight the fertilizer, which get washed out. And then you slowly but surely improve it. But that's a bit where you have to watch out that you don't overdo it. Because if you bring in the resilience, forget it.
Yes, well, you're essentially potentially telling them how to do their job.
Exactly.
Which isn't what you want to do. You want to give them all of the data so they can do their job better.
Exactly.
Are you hiring?
And that's a fine line.
Yeah.
Are you hiring at the moment?
Yeah.
You are, actively?
Yes.
And do you have an idea of how big TurfCoach is going to become by the end of 2025? Have you got an idea?
By the end of the year?
Yeah, how big does it need to become?
Ooh. So there's a certain level of customer service required at the beginning, and then you need to consider how big markets are. So the next market, bigger market outside of Europe we're going to go for is definitely the US, and that will require at least 10 people. Yeah, just to start even in it. And we'll probably, I just had like talks with several of our angels, we're probably going to burn through 2 to 3 million just to actually enter there. Yeah. But then when you have 10 people, you could be having whatever, 200 clients. So that's already something around 5 to 10 million annual recurring revenue just from one country. Yeah, and 200 clients is not difficult in the States, given that you have college sports, American football, MLS, Women's Soccer League, etc.
Is there obviously, anyone who's a fan of football, who's moving into the space, your dream has to be to conquer the top flights of all the different countries. But what's the sort of minimum level that someone can really think about doing this, all the way down to non-league football?
I mean, I would say the minimum level always depends. You can look at it from two sides. The one side is just the sheer cost reduction in turf maintenance and pitch grass maintenance, and that already pays for our product. But then you can look obviously at what's the worth of the team, of the first team. And if you say you have a small club but they have 3 pitches, it's probably still worth it for them, and we're obviously making a tailored package then to reduce the price and make it comfortable for them. Whereas in Germany, the third league teams are required to have an undersoil heating. And guess what? That undersoil heating goes through 2,000 pounds a day in winter, and it's not controlled digitally, but controlled analog. So with a little algorithm tweak, you can save around 30 to 40% energy.
Wow.
So really relatively straightforward there to also implement a digital solution. And we've been working there with, we've been running some studies and doing some R&D, and we're actually coming up with a product in that direction. But yeah, at the end, I think you can go broad, particularly if you think about city councils and green space management.
One of the last questions from me, you mentioned Figma before you sent off the pitch deck. I always like to find out, from entrepreneurs like you, we've all got our favorite little tools that we use. Figma's great. We love Canva. We're always making pictures on Canva. Is there any other tools you'd shout out that you kind of use on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely fully benefit from all of the aspects of Slack. So I definitely do reminders in Slack. I even use their to-do lists. And at the end of the day, that's on that side. And on the other side, I think on the tech side, GitHub. But I'm a big fan of, particularly if you're a startup, of talking. Sitting people down in an office, being able to bring people together. Because this whole remote work aspect is great if you need focus time, but given that you need a lot of intercommunication, you need to adapt, you need to be flexible. As a startup, number one thing is to talk. And if you don't do that, you're almost bound to fail because things change rapidly. Yeah, I mean, we have tenders running for the Bundesliga right now. If the Bundesliga says yes next week, we have quite some things which we have to develop. And I need to make sure the developers understand what we really need to develop, and we need to understand what we can sell and don't oversell. And all of these things kind of play together. And if tech doesn't talk with business development, you're definitely going to run into the classical issue of having conflicts there. And the other trick, I would say, which we did as a startup, which was very valuable, was to get a UI UX designer in very early.
Yes.
In-house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And fair play, your website's very nice.
Thanks.
You know, I'm a bit of a website perv, and that was a very nice website. It's very well laid out.
I'll give the props to Ashok.
Yeah,
he
nice.
came up with the designs, and I mean, that's the point. If nowadays anyone can come up with a software, and I think with ChatGPT and the likes, you can probably code even quicker. The real question is how much contextual knowledge of your users is in there, and how much did you simplify it so that it's intuitive for him or her?
Yes, yeah. And I think, you know, we've spoken about it on other episodes previously, that the next wave of businesses are going to be micro businesses. There's going to be a lot of them. And it's going to be more important than ever that people behind those businesses are making relationships with the people that they're selling to, because otherwise, where's the scale? There's no learning, there's no innovation. That's just the fact.
Yeah, and like I said, like thinking about developing things in isolation or having a setup which is too complicated, just it doesn't work. You need to listen to your client. You need to be pretty quick and agile, and you need to basically develop something which is contextual, very much working for that person. I mean, if you think about it, I took a niche, which seems like a niche. The only lucky thing about this niche is, well, it's that football is the most played sport in the world at the end.
Yeah. And you're a fan of it, right?
Yeah, big time. Yeah, of course.
Big time. You called it a beautiful game the first time we spoke.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, this man's passionate about his product.
I love football.
Yeah,
Of
nice.
course. Yeah. I mean, I remember the funny story actually, because when I first met my girlfriend on the first date, and she was telling me, so I'm really not too much into football because her father is, her brother is, and everything. What about yourself? And I was like, no, not really. In my head, I was thinking, just running a company, fully focused on football. Yeah.
Covering up TurfCoach.
Exactly. And then like just a few hours later, she's like, you're full of shit, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, of course, big time into football.
Well, thanks for sitting with us for a cold hour today by the pitch.
Oh, not at all.
Sharing
Thanks a
with
lot.
us your insights.
Survived it in the t-shirt. Makes me
Yeah, no, it makes you feel
it's
English.
soft.
Yeah, we're going to put a coat on you with the
Yeah.
all
Canva
good,
can
all
help with that. Yeah.
No, thanks, guys.
Cool. Thank you. Awesome.
Thanks a lot.